One click. That's all it took to turn a private life into an officer's curiosity. A black man's case. Sealed, protected, off-limits. Opened like a door that was never his to touch. He thought no one would notice. But audit logs remember. Patterns speak. And bias leaves fingerprints no glove can hide. Within hours, screens lit up, alerts triggered, and a quiet investigation turned toward the very person behind the keyboard. By the time the sun went down, consequences were already on their way. What exposed him so fast? And what did that file reveal that made everything unravel? Morning in a small city carried the kind of light that made everything look honest. Isaiah Green liked it that way. He opened his shop early, watered the plants in the window, and stacked the day's orders, one careful pile at a time. He coached on weekends, checked on his mother most evenings, and planned slow, steady steps toward things that took time. Credit repair, a safer car, a future with fewer surprises. Months back, he had filed a formal complaint after a stop that started with a tail light and ended with a search that didn't end at the curb. He did everything by the book. Forms, signatures, patience, because that was supposed to be the way through. The case went sealed and silent, tucked behind digital walls he had never seen. He moved on the way people move on when moving back isn't an option. He learned the rhythm of not thinking about it. He focused on the living parts of life that don't fit into reports. Across town, in a windowless office, another rhythm beat against that silence. Curiosity dressed as suspicion, entitlement disguised as routine. Systems had been upgraded after a lawsuit, layers of controls, alerts, audits no one could sidestep. It was the kind of invisible guardrail you only notice when someone tries to hop it. Isaiah counted boxes and taped lids shut as a new order came through. The day turned simple and ordinary. He had no reason to know that somewhere, his name sat in a search bar like bait, and a decision was drifting toward the enter key. Something was about to break its quiet. If stories like this matter to you, please subscribe and help us reach 1,000 supporters. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't miss the twist at the end. Now back to the story. The officer sat in front of a terminal that hummed like a refrigerator in an empty room. He had learned the system well enough to confuse confidence with clearance. He typed Isaiah's name, watched the auto-completion offer the case number, and opened a file that was never his to see. Sealed meant sealed. Protected meant protected. But habit makes rules feel optional when no one is watching until someone is. Security lived in the shadows of the interface. Every click wrote a line into a ledger no one could edit. The system kept time like a metronome. Credentials, timestamps, IP addresses, fields accessed, pages scrolled, attachments previewed. He navigated to internal notes, slow and satisfied, letting each page load like a small victory. He took screenshots. He printed pages he thought he'd need later. The printer on the third floor wheezed and delivered a stack with Isaiah's name faintly visible in the footer. Across the building, an analyst reviewed the morning's anomaly dashboard. The graph spiked in a thin red line, easy to miss unless you were trained not to. A patrol-level login touching a sealed internal affairs complaint outside of any assigned role. She clicked into the log, then pulled 3 months of history for context. Patterns surfaced. Late-night queries clustered around black residents, unrelated to calls for service. No investigative assignments to justify the view. The pattern had the shape of a bias long denied and suddenly made visible. She flagged it to internal affairs and legal. The team moved quickly, not with panic but with precision. They mirrored the logs, secured the print queue, and placed a silent hold on the officer's credentials that wouldn't trigger until the next authentication check. HR prepared a checklist that read like an exit already written. The chief signed an authorization allowing immediate removal pending review, a clause born of prior failures and paid for in settlements and broken trust. Isaiah's day wove through errands and small wins. A regular left a note of thanks on the counter. A delivery arrived early. He swept the floor in calming arcs. Outside, a car slowed just long enough to be noticed and then moved on, leaving behind only a question that never found an answer. He didn't know that in a server room nearby, a copy of his sealed complaint now sat as evidence not against him, but for him. By early afternoon, the team had everything they needed: the click stream, the print log, the badge time-in, the camera static that showed a body crossing the hall to the third-floor printer at the exact minute a sealed file became paper. They did not need a confession. The system had already given them a story that matched the truth. A calendar invite went out, polite wording covering a firmer purpose. An envelope was prepared with a letter inside that changed an ending the officer had assumed he would never face. At 3:45, the last piece lined up. An alert confirming that the same user had reopened the file. Curiosity rarely stops at one click. The trap had sprung itself. The only thing left was to close the loop. The conference room smelled faintly of dry coffee and carpet cleaner, the kind of neutral air that absorbs any emotion without leaving a trace. The envelope lay on the table, heavy with its own certainty. On a screen, a timeline waited, timestamps stacked like a staircase leading to a place there was no walking back from. The door clicked once. A chair rolled. The air shifted into that tight, undeniable stillness that follows when a story is about to be read aloud by evidence instead of voices. The officer looked at his own digital reflection on the screen. A username, a badge number, a machine ID. Each moment had been captured. The first search, the forbidden page, the internal note, the print command, the second view. Cross-referenced with a camera still that placed him exactly where the paper landed. Context piled onto context, not a single gap left to thread a denial through. The narrative was simple because the wrongdoing was, too. No emergency, no assignment, no warrant, no justification. Just a decision made in secrecy that forgot secrecy doesn't exist in systems built to remember. The envelope opened with a slow, final sound. Paper slid against paper. Words named the policy, the breach, the harm, the cause. The badge on his chest felt heavier because it did not belong there anymore. Access to systems locked out in the span of a heartbeat. The door to hallways he once moved through without question now closed in a way that felt smaller than the hallways themselves. Shock wasn't dramatic. It was hollow. The edges of the room went distant. He had made the click. The click had made the case. Some consequences arrive like storms. This one arrived like a mirror, held at eye level with nowhere to look but back at what had been done. The letter lay open. The audit trail stood taller than any excuse. Another page slid forward, a checklist, signatures waiting for ink. The system that had watched him watch a file now watched him leave a role he had misused. The sound of the envelope closing was the sound of a door that would not reopen. When the dust settled, Isaiah received a letter of a different kind. It arrived with the measured tone of institutions that rarely admit anything out loud. It acknowledged an unauthorized access, apologized for a breach of trust, and confirmed a termination he had not asked for but quietly needed the world to see. He read it at his counter, hands steady, breathing measured. Relief did not rush in. It moved carefully, testing the corners of a space that had long been tightened by experience. There is a cost to being watched without cause, even when the watching becomes the proof. Nothing about his life changed overnight. The shop opened the next day. The plants needed water again. A neighbor asked about a product and left smiling. But something subtle shifted. The sealed space where his name had been mishandled was sealed again, this time with a lock that felt less imaginary. His complaint, once a whisper into bureaucracy, had echoed in a way he could finally hear. The city made small, visible adjustments. Trainings were no longer slideshows but scenarios with stakes. Access reviews gained a heartbeat instead of a checkbox. The analyst who caught the anomaly updated the playbook and filed it where others would find it. A pattern had been named before it could pretend to be random again. This wasn't a story of perfect justice. It was a story of an evidence trail that refused to look away. In a landscape where too many wrongs dissolve into confusion and excuses, one wrong met a system ready to hold the line. A man's privacy had been turned into curiosity, and curiosity had been turned into consequence. That arc matters even when it doesn't fix everything it touches. If every system remembered this well, how many stories would bend sooner toward accountability? If every click carried a certainty of light, how many would never happen at all? Share what you think, add your voice to this conversation, and don't forget to support the stories that insist on being seen.